to a worldwide audience. And now the host of Here's to Your Health on LA Talk Live, Joshua Lane.
We're back. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live television network. I'm your host, Joshua Lane. Many of us now use probiotics, and we realize that we feel better when we take acidophilus or probiotic products. And my next guest is Mark Rawlinson, who is with the Kendy Corporation that brings over a acidophilus product from Bulgaria, which has a long history of use. Mark Rawlinson, welcome to Here's to Your Health.
Good afternoon, Josh, to you and your listeners.
Yeah, happy to have you here. So probiotics is very popular, and there's a lot of discussion about it. What do I get when I take probiotics?
Well, one of the dangers of talking about the benefits of probiotics is that it can end up sounding a little bit like snake oil.
Because it does everything, which it does.
It can affect everything. So
that's fair.
Primarily, people are looking for improvements in their immune system, their ability to fight off, the infection from bacteria and viral and so on, digestion, regulating their waste production. It can also pan over into various allergies, lactose intolerance, for example, more serious conditions, colitis, candida. But it's a fairly accepted medical fact that around 70 to 75% of all the illnesses and infections that we are likely to suffer from in our lives will originate in the gastrointestinal system. Mm-hmm. So it's a very important part of the whole of the function of the body, how we ingest nutrients from food and supplements that we take. Even bone mass, calcium ingestion, and so many different things. So clearly I'm biased, but I would suggest that in the general supplement categories, probiotics should be the number one on anyone's list for finding a good probiotic that works for them. It's the supplement that I think has the most potential for very specific conditions and just general good health.
I think you're in good company now. I think most people would agree with you that the probiotic is very important. Now, you mentioned many things that probiotics do, and you also mentioned that, 70% of the immune system is in the GI tract?
No, about 70% of illnesses or infections. If you become ill or acquire an infection over the course of your life, it will tend to originate in your gastrointestinal system, probably. And there can be many reasons, but one of the common ones is that for some reason your immune system may not be functioning to its full capacity, and that can be for many reasons. Right. Because you've had other illnesses, stress, antibiotics, sometimes age, poor diet. There can be many reasons, but I mean, you can look at, for example, we all know you get on an aeroplane, there's maybe 200 people all breathing the same atmosphere for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours.
Right.
When they walk off the plane, only some of them have picked up an infection. Most of the others haven't. Well, why? Well, it's probably because their immune system is not functioning as it should be.
Right. That also seems accurate. Now, if I take a probiotic, why does it help me improve digestion?
The way the body breaks down food, it's partly a function of what's called the microflora. The microflora is the ecology of the bacteria, because there are many different types of bacteria in your GI system, and they are there in vast quantities. To throw a statistic at you, if you took all of the bacteria from a typical human, that would amount to about 7 pounds of bacteria.
Yes. Now that idea that we actually carry around 7 pounds of bacteria, that's actually pretty new, isn't it?
That understanding of the bacteria is fairly new, yes. And it's also true that there are more bacteria in your body than living cells in the rest of your body. So that makes up a very large proportion of the number of living cells. So what in effect you're carrying around with you is this microecology of bacteria which are working on your behalf to, for example, ingest food. It's well established that, for example, inulin, which is a part of our product, helps the body. Inulin, yes, not insulin, just to make sure there's no confusion.
Inulin. What's inulin?
It's a natural fiber which is typically found in grains and green plants, chicory, burdock, dandelion, and so on. And for obvious reasons, our average intake of inulin is somewhat less than it was 100 years ago, for example. And it has many benefits, but one of the benefits is that the presence of inulin will help the body ingest somewhere in the region of up to 18% more calcium from what you put into your body than if it's absent. So, for example, many people will take a calcium supplement without necessarily understanding that just because you're putting calcium into your body does not necessarily mean that it's ingesting it and converting it into bone mass, for example. So inulin will help that, and the presence of a healthy microflora will help to break down food, as well as helping to keep out, to stop the bacteria. You're going to breathe harmful pathogens in. The question is, will they actually colonize and get a hold in your system and develop into an infection? And the bacteria are what prevent them from doing that.
And what foods, you mentioned burdock and chicory, what other food has a lot of inulin?
It's mainly a grain product, so
Grain,
eating any product
so
with
brown rice
wheat and rice, wheat, any product like that comes from a grain source.
And the idea of the use of probiotics, the things that most of us know now in 2013, was any of this really known in 1999?
There's a lot of research on probiotics that's been going on for a long time, and partly because it still sits there as in the supplement category rather than the drug category. So it still doesn't need to meet the requirements that a drug would have to do in terms of its testing.
Right.
But most of the research that's been done has been pretty clear that probiotics do have a benefit. I mean, in fact, it's indisputable that the probiotic bacteria in your body are essential to life and the functioning of the body. And really, the birth of probiotics is very much linked to what's unique about our product.
The Kendy product.
The Kendy product. And it sounds like a bit of a history lesson, but if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, around about 1903, 1904, there was, in scientific circles, quite a famous phenomena that the rural population of Bulgaria, which were primarily farmers, had abnormally good health and long life, and naturally people wanted to know why. And a Russian biologist called Dr. Ilya Mechnikov, who at the time was the director of the Pasteur Institute in Paris, went to Bulgaria to investigate this phenomena, and he is now understood and recognized as being the father of probiotics. He is the guy that identified these bacteria that aren't pathogens, that actually are essential to good health. And one of the things he identified is that this inherent microflora in the body is primarily made up of acidophilus and bifidobacterium, and it's present in every human being. So that was interesting in itself, but that didn't identify what was different about the Bulgarians. And what Dr. Mechnikov found was that there is a particular probiotic bacteria, which he christened Lactobacillus bulgaricus, which has many different properties in terms of its physical size, proteins, efficacy, and so on, than the acidophilus and bifido that's in everyone. And this bacteria is only found in the soil and plants of very particular areas, normally in the mountains of Bulgaria around Sofia. And what was happening was that the livestock were eating the plants. That was getting into their digestive system and their milk. Then the farmers would milk the livestock, and part of what they did with that was to ferment that milk into yogurt, which of course means that those bacteria are reproducing very fast to curdle the milk into yogurt, which the Bulgarians would then eat. So the Bulgarians were the only people on earth whose daily diet consisted of large quantities of Lactobacillus bulgaricus. And Dr. Mechnikov published his findings in a number of scientific papers and a book called The Prolongation of Life, which is still in print. And he also won the Nobel Prize for Medicine in 1908 for his work. So this is not old wives' tales or voodoo medicine. This was very well established and understood by the medical community even over 100 years ago. But for various reasons, primarily because the bacteria are very delicate, and if you don't process them right, they don't survive long outside of their natural environment. And 100 years ago, there just wasn't the means to do that. And by the time there was, the political situation in those Eastern European countries made the development of commercial products just unfeasible.
For sure.
So it wasn't
because the communists really mostly building tanks.
Mostly building tanks. And actually, funnily enough, and as strange as it sounds, there is a direct correlation between all of the work that was done for military use on the Bulgaricus bacteria.
Oh, really?
Yes, it was very well funded, and money was no object, basically, and it was primarily used as emergency rations for anyone who might be in highly stressful conditions. I don't mean highly stressful by our standards. I mean by soldiers, sailors, airmen, and so on, by those standards. And they would take that in a very concentrated form as part of their daily rations and the emergency rations. So development was very well funded. But when that ended in the late 80s, early 90s, it took a long time for independent companies to develop. I mean, the whole concept of borrowing money to invest money to create a commercially viable product and then selling the product and putting money back into
a new concept there.
It's a whole new concept. There was no infrastructure for that. So we're in the slightly strange position in that we are both the oldest and really the newest probiotic on the market, and picking. Clearly it's a very complicated subject. It's easy to simplify down, and most people look at probiotics in the same way as they look at medicine. It's a very general term.
Yes.
But actually the taxonomy of the bacteria, how you pick different strains, because the names like Acidophilus and Bulgaricus and so on, they are cultures, but below those are many different strains of, for example, Acidophilus and Bulgaricus. And picking the right strains that have the right probiotic characteristics and blending them and putting them in the right carriers and so on, it's a very complicated process. And a lot of time and money went into developing Actiflora so that it would be the highest efficacy that it's possible using those bacteria. And
Actiflora is the name of the Kendy strain.
Exactly. No, Actiflora is the brand name of the product, which includes within it multiple strains of Bulgaricus and Acidophilus and Bifido and Streptococcus thermophilus blended together with what's called a supernatant, which is the carrier that the bacteria are fermented in, and then they're dry frozen and put into capsule form that Actiflora is supplied in. And the inulin is a prebiotic. And if you put the two together, a pro and a prebiotic product, they are combined called a synbiotic.
Oh, that's
so that's the term. Symbiotic means pro and prebiotic.
What's the term again?
Synbiotic.
Symbiotic.
S-Y-N. Yeah, synbiotic. And the idea of the prebiotic is that a major part of the efficacy of a probiotic is not simply the number that you put into your body, because although people look at packaging and see 20 billion, 30, 40 billion, and of course we naturally think of those as big numbers.
Yes.
But in the context of the trillions upon trillions upon trillions of bacteria that you have in your microflora, it's actually a drop in the ocean.
Yes.
And where you hope to get the benefit from is that those bacteria come out of their suspended animation and they will reproduce exponentially. So 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, and so on. So it's the reproduction that's really critical to getting the quantities that will make a difference. And the prebiotic is, in layman's terms, it's like putting a packed lunch in the capsule, so that when those bacteria are reactivated by the heat and the moisture of the stomach and the GI system, the bacteria will be able to feed on the prebiotic to statistically increase their chances of surviving and then reproducing and colonizing and then reaping the benefits that we expect.
Okay, I have a question for you that a friend of mine asked me. I did not have an answer for this, and I thought it was actually a very good question. The friend asked me, he said, okay, but so if I take a probiotic, okay, fine, I see the science, I need it, I take it. But if indeed it does reproduce in my body, why do I need to take it more than once? And I thought, I don't have a great science background, and I thought, seemed like a fair question, because I take probiotics every day, and I really personally need them. I do better on them. But why can't I just take them once, and then I'm good? Why?
Well, that depends on the bacteria.
Right.
As I mentioned, Acidophilus and Bifido are certain strains of those are indigenous to the human body, so they will be there in some quantity throughout your life. Now, Bulgaricus is not. It's not indigenous, and it won't colonize for forever. So, for example, if you went on a course of our probiotic, you would see Bulgaricus appear in your stool, in your body, if you were testing for it. But then if you stopped taking it, the Bulgaricus and Streptococcus bacteria would have disappeared typically within 10 to 14 days.
I see. Okay.
So those particular bacteria don't colonize long term, so you want to keep replenishing them. But another point would be if we all had the ideal lifestyle with the perfect diet, and we were all 25 all the time and never suffered from any stress and never got any illnesses and so on, then I'm sure our microflora would be healthy and stay healthy.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't, of course. It dissipates. Clearly there's a lot of science behind the binding of the bacteria to the walls of the GI system, and if that binding is loosened for some reason, they will be flushed out. And in some ways, it's a matter of real estate. If the walls of the GI system all over it, from the mouth down to the waste productive system, if there's areas where pathogens can settle and colonize and then they start to reproduce and multiply, then you have an infection. Mm-hmm. So denying them that space and the nutrients and creating an environment where those pathogens cannot prosper, that's part of what probiotics are doing. And Bulgaricus is particularly strong at that. It's a very big bacteria. It takes up a lot of space. It reproduces very quickly. So you get more of an effect. And if somebody's taking just an Acidophilus or Bifido, they are in effect adding a relatively small amount to what they already have a lot of. And consequently, the benefits tend to be, it varies of course, but it often is minimal. Mm-hmm. With Bulgaricus, you're adding something entirely new to the equation, which you won't have in your body. And so people that take our product tend to get a much more radical and noticeable change in a much shorter space of time.
Because they're getting an enhanced effect, is that it?
Because of the nature of the bacteria themselves and how they work, and then there are bacteriocins, immunoglobulins, proteins, and so on, which collect around like a shell around the bacteria themselves, and you'll get a benefit from that. They will also have a very I hate to use the word holistic, it's a bit of a buzzword, but it very much is a holistic benefit in that they're not only benefiting because they are present in your body, they will also increase the binding characteristics and the functionality of the Acidophilus and Bifido, which are already there. So it's a multi-level benefit.
Sure.
And the answer to the question originally is you need to keep taking that to keep the bacteria present in the human body.
And the individual who has a history of taking a lot of antibiotics, which turns out to be a lot of us, I'm in that category, that individual really seems to benefit from taking probiotics.
Well, yes, I mean, antibiotics are often necessary,
right.
But they can do harm as well, and they tend to dissipate the good bacteria as well, and that's why people often will find that they're more prone to infections and illness after a course of antibiotics. So that's a good time, but after or during a course of antibiotics is a good time to be taking a suitable probiotic supplement, but not only then. I mean, I would encourage anyone, even if it's not our product, heaven forbid.
Right.
If somebody has a probiotic,
is there another product? No.
There are one or two.
Okay.
If somebody is reaping a benefit from a probiotic, they should keep taking it, because it's not something you can just take and then hope everything will stay perfect from then on in. It doesn't work like that.
And why would I use the Kendy, and how much do I use? Let's say someone stepped on a nail and they get a course of antibiotics. How much would an adult, male or female, use of the Kendy product, of the Kendy capsule?
Talking in generalizations,
yeah, general terms,
typically we would encourage people to take what we call a loading dose, because you're starting from zero. In the Bulgaricus and Streptococcus, we recommend that people take, it could be 4, even as many as 6 or 8 capsules. You can't overdose. You can't take too much. It's not possible to do yourself any harm. So a loading dose of that quantity for 2 or 3 days to build up that colony of Bulgaricus is a good idea. Typically then people would take that down to 1 a day. Now that can vary for people taking it for very specific conditions. So I would encourage anyone to play with the quantity until they get the minimum that works for them. But typically 1 a day should be more than enough, because we do have a very high count of bacteria at 45 billion.
45 billion?
45 billion. Yeah.
Right.
And now a numbers game is misleading. You can't automatically say that a probiotic with 20 billion is twice as good as one with 10 billion.
Right.
It's more complicated than that. As I said, the efficacy of the bacteria, the capacity to reproduce exponentially and so on, these are all major factors. But assuming you have the right bacteria, then the more of them you put in your body, the better, because the more of them will survive and reproduce and so on. You get that knock-on benefit. So the reproductive capacity of the Bulgaricus is extremely good. The inulin is a great aid to that. One of the key elements of our products compared with some other probiotics is that we don't use enteric coating. As far as we are concerned, the use of enteric coating is there to compensate for using the incorrect bacteria. Because those probiotic bacteria should be all the way through your gastrointestinal system, from the mouth all the way through to the colon, the lower intestines, and so on.
So your sense of it is that there's the enteric coating is there for what reason?
To delay the breakdown of the physical capsule that the bacteria are housed in. It will delay the breakdown of that capsule and the release of the bacteria until they get into the intestines, out of the stomach, that is. But I mean, clearly nature doesn't enteric coat anything.
Right.
And equally, I think it's fairly well understood that the history of probiotics is linked to yogurt, and clearly yogurt isn't enteric coated. And so if you have the right bacteria, then you want it to be colonizing in across as much surface area of the GI system as you possibly can, and not limit it to very small areas. And that's one of the benefits of our product, is that you will get that the colonization across a very wide range of the body. And many people will break open our capsules and sprinkle the powder into whatever you want: water, milk, yogurt, food, and then of course you're getting it from the mouth onwards.
And Kendy, how long has Kendy been available? Is Kendy available in Europe and the United States? Or?
Yes, it's available all over the world. In the United States, it's been available since around 2004. In 2003, we had to register our particular strains of bacteria with the FDA. Because the regulations are that if you have a product or ingredients which have not been available in the US prior to, I think it was 1994, you have to register them. And we had to do that because our bacteria strains are unique. So we did that in 2003, and the product was available from 2004 onwards. It's been available in Bulgaria for many, many years, and most of Eastern Europe. It's now spread out into Europe and Asia. And for any of you viewers that don't know, Bulgaria has been part of the European Union since, I think it's 2009. I may have that year on, but somewhere at 2008 or 2009. So all of the manufacturers, including supplements, drugs, OTCs, and so on, in Bulgaria have to meet exactly the same standards as the UK, Germany, Switzerland, and so on. Very high
that's good to know, because people are always wondering if it doesn't come from the United States, are the standards good? And that seems like a very fair thing to worry about.
Yeah, well, Kendy themselves had to invest an awful lot of money to come up to the European standards and meet them, which they were doing for years in advance of Bulgaria's entry into the EEC, because obviously people knew it was coming, and manufacturers of all kinds were given a number of years to come into line with the regulations so the transitions would be smooth. And that's what Kendy were doing for a large part of the early 2000s, of investing to meet, as I say, the same standards as Switzerland and Germany and so on, which are recognized, I think it's fair to say, as, if not the highest, then certainly right in the top echelon of manufacturing.
Everyone loves German products, obviously. Great product, great scientific products. So again, what is the strains of bacteria, if I'm using that term correctly, that I get in the Kendy Acidophilus?
They're actually listed on the bottle. They have names that are linked to they're actually protected under the laws of product copyright in Bulgaria. They're registered in the Bank of Microorganisms. You can't actually patent a bacteria. It's not, but the way that you process it, yes, and the carriers that you use and the final product can be. So those particular strains are registered in the Bank of Microorganisms, and they are unique, and the processes that we use in them are completely different to any other probiotic on the market. You touched on this issue at the beginning. If most consumers go into a pharmacy or a health food store and look at probiotics, it looks like there's a very broad range of options.
Yes.
Many different labels and formats and prices and numbers and so on. But actually, if you dig a little deeper and you look at them, you'll find that they're all either totally made of Acidophilus and Bifido, or primarily, and even the blended ones, if they actually break down the numbers of the different cultures, you'll see that the vast majority are Acidophilus and Bifido, because they are the easiest to get, they're the most plentiful, they're the most economic to put into a product. But our position would be that whilst we're not saying that's without benefit, we're saying that's not likely to have as much of a benefit as taking something which is proven to be have greater efficacy as a probiotic in many different characteristics. And when you're adding something new to the body that you haven't had before, naturally you would expect it to be a more radical change.
And where can I buy these Kendy probiotics?
We're mainly in health food stores, Martha's, Sprouts, Mother's Market.
Mother's is a great
yeah, absolutely.
And Sprouts, of course, they're a powerhouse.
Absolutely. Super supplements up further up the northwest coast in Washington. They're listed on our website. You can see the retail outlets. We're on a number of online retailers as well. You can also get them direct from Kendy. So,
but why don't you tell us how we can get them? Give me some contact info.
If you go to www.kendyusa.com, you will be able to order from that website if you wish, or you can look at the list of retailers. There's a little drop-down menu where you can see all of our retail outlets separated out into states. So www.kendyusa.com.
Well, Mark from Kendy, I'd like to thank you for being a guest today on Here's to Your Health. It's been it's an important subject, and I think I've actually used Kendy, and I think it's a great product. And I appreciate you being my guest today on Here's to Your Health.
It's entirely my pleasure.
Thank you. You've been listening to Here's to Your Health on the LA Talk Live television network. I'm your host, Josh Lane. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after these important messages.